This is Stone Soup, a podcast by the charity Age UK Camden. They have been supporting older people in Camden for over half a century to stay active, connected, independent and empowered in later life. For more information, visit ageukcamden.org.uk.
Yeah, okay. My name is Tudor Allen. Quite an appropriate name for my job, as it turns out. The reason I have that unusual name, Tudor, is because my parents are Welsh. Tudor is a Welsh name. You sometimes get it as a first name or a surname. My parents are actually artists and art teachers, so they had no idea that I would go into a job where the name Tudor would be appropriate because of the historical connections. So that's me, Tudor Allen. My parents were from South Wales, but actually, because my father went up to Cumbria and got a teaching job in the 50s, that's where I grew up. So I grew up in the countryside outside Carlisle, but actually a part of the country that at one stage was part of Scotland, so just north of Hadrian's Wall. So I've got a kind of Scottish connection as well. And my sister, ironically, who's an artist, she's the one who's done a bit of the genealogy, and she's done her DNA test. So we discover we're something like... We're mainly Welsh, but quite a lot of English, but a dollop of Scottish, and I think about 1% Irish. So, yes, I grew up in Cumbria. Then I came to London after school, after the sixth form. Took a year off, worked in London, then went to university down here. Actually studied English literature, not history, and then. Went into various jobs, but my last job I wasn't particularly happy in, and I was thinking, what do I really want to do? And then I came up with this concept of archives, that might suit me. So that led me to explore that job. I managed to get a place on a course to train, and had various jobs. And about 15 years ago, I got this job at Camden, and I've loved it. But I also like working in Camden because Camden is such an interesting borough historically, and also I like working where we happen to be based, which is in the Holborn area. It's a nice historic, attractive part of London. But at the moment, I am Local Studies and Archives Manager. I'm a professionally qualified archivist. I came on the team when I started here as the archivist on the team. I didn't manage the section. There's been a number of cuts over the years, everywhere as we know, including us. So by default, I ended up as the manager of the section. So yes, I'm not just doing archives work. I'm managing what is a combined local studies and archives centre. There's three main strands to our job. One is preserving the history of the borough, the documentary heritage of the borough, which involves taking new material, always growing, new archival collections. Number two is making that documentary material available and accessible to users. There's no point keeping it for the sake of it. You want it to be used, so obviously we run a public service. We have people come in here to look at the material, a whole wide range of different types of researchers we get, and we answer inquiries, written, telephone. So there's all that aspect, and part of that is cataloguing. So we have this material, but until we get it properly processed and catalogued, it's not usable by the public. So that's an essential part of the job, the cataloguing, etc., the finding aids, as you call them. And the third main aspect of the job is the community engagement side, which is me going out giving talks, us organising, hosting talks here. We sometimes do a different type of an event, something with music perhaps, something with drama or poetry readings, whatever. That's all connected to Camden history. We also do a lot of class visits. We have primary school children from Camden come in and work with the materials. We work on loads of different projects. We put on exhibitions. So that's the third main strand. But you asked me to define what an archivist is. I mean, strictly speaking, so my job, as I say, is wider than being an archivist. But an archivist is somebody who is looking after archival documentation, preserving it, and making it available for use by people for various purposes. And archives are primary sources, if you strictly define them. They're not printed books about history. They're actual records produced by people and organisations. And also, again, there's the distinction between archival documentation and museum objects. So though we have some objects in our collections that we've acquired over the years, and we will sometimes take them in if they're small and integral to an archival collection, really it's not our area. We don't have the expertise, we don't have the space. We're not a museum. So we're not really dealing with three-dimensional objects. We're always finding new things that are interesting. I mean, I had to prepare a new talk the other day, focusing on Hampstead and some of the treasures in our collection related to Hampstead. And I was looking for an early book that I could use as an example, and I found something I didn't realise we had. And this was a play, I think it's called Hampstead Heath. It's based in the Hampstead Heath area, of course. Hampstead Heath's part of Camden. Written in the early 1700s. The book is printed in 1706. And I think it was put on at Drury Lane Theatre, that's correct, with Collie Kibber, who was a famous comic actor of the time, in one of the roles. So it's probably not that great a play. I haven't read it as yet, but it was wonderful to discover. We had that in our collections. So yes, you discover things about history, the history of the area. You discover things about what we have in our collections. And we have some letters of George Bernard Shaw, original letters by George Bernard Shaw in our collections, who Shaw had a lot of connection with the Camden area, living here for, well, a best part of 20 years, but also getting involved in local government. He was a St Pancras vestryman, and then he was a St Pancras councillor. So we have those Shaw letters. Shaw's a very interesting figure, and he became the first freeman of the borough of St Pancras. And I read a memory of somebody who was an official who worked for the St Pancras Borough Council, and he said that the council meetings when Shaw was on the council became like a form of entertainment. He was so funny and witty. So I mean, I think possibly today's committee meetings in councils around the country, maybe they're not as full of humour as someone like a genius like George Bernard Shaw was able to, inject into these meetings. And we have a particularly nice example of a diary. It's a diary of a man called John Stevenson, who was the Heathkeeper on Hampstead Heath. And the diary dates from around the 1830s, all handwritten. It's a record of, his working life. And it's wonderfully entertaining because he's a character, quite opinionated, and and seeming to get in quite a lot of fracas with people and arguments. So there's a lot of bad spelling. His spelling is atrocious. There's some bad language, and there's some bad attitude. For example, you get an entry where he's really angry with this gardener for just chucking this rubbish on the heath, and they get into this dialogue, and it ends with, the gardener saying, you don't you ever speak to me like that again, or I'm going to kick you up the backside, to paraphrase. So it's quite fun. So yes, he's a character, I suppose, that springs to mind, but there's plenty of others. Before I came here, I'd already started learning Italian. I love Italy. And after I'd been here a few months, I discovered that just along the way from here was the old Italian quarter, London's Little Italy. That was a revelation, and I thought that might be something interesting to pursue. So in the end, we did an exhibition. I did a talk on the subject. We produced a little publication. That was a lot of fun. So that was an interesting discovery. Things like Karl Marx. I mean, we've got the records of Highgate Cemetery here. Karl Marx is one of the famous people buried there. We've got his burial record. But learning that Marx lived most of his adult life in Camden was a little revelation. So, yeah, I've learned a lot about the history of Camden that's surprising. And I'm constantly discovering new things we have in our collections. We have so much, and I don't have time just to go through them all day. I'm getting on with doing my normal job. I get plenty of feedback where people, found a talk interesting, or they learnt a lot from it. But when it goes beyond that, when you're providing something beyond that to people, that's really special. And there's other ways that can happen with an archive service. People come in here and they discover something that's important or emotional to them from their own lives, or they meet people. Sometimes it's nice when different researchers start talking. They just happen to be in here and they find some common connection. They get talking. So that's some of the nicest feedback we had with regard to the talks. Sometimes people have discovered upsetting things from their past. Sometimes people are investigating something evidently quite sensitive from their past. Sometimes people are really happy, they're jubilant because they've discovered something that they've been trying to establish for a long period of time. So it is quite emotional. Something that springs to mind with your question is, sometimes we've had filming take place here. We've had filming take place here for fiction, TV fiction. We've had filming take place for documentaries, and we had an episode of Who Do You Think You Are filmed here. And the particular celebrity, she was researching a tragic story in her family history of a child, one of her ancestors who died in a fire. So she's looking through the newspapers to read the story. It's very important to take these records, because if we don't, who does? And if we don't take in the records, they might just end up destroyed, which often happens. And you hear terrible stories of the destruction of really valuable, would have been wonderful documents full of interest that have just been destroyed by people who don't really have any historic sense. So we are pretty vital in preserving that history.
The story that I then went on to tell was the story of Stone Soup. And Stone Soup is all about everybody putting in a little. And together we have a feast. heart of it all. About living a good life. That if we all share what we have, the outcome is a feast for us all.